Harden was reported missing July 23rd. She and her child were at home.
It just still doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem like...
After posting a video of his confession on Facebook, dies in prison.
She didn't get that choice and he did. Like, he chose...
Ashley Harden didn't deserve what was done to her, but let me give you the full picture first. In the early hours of July 23rd, 2022, in Rockford, Illinois, a 46-year-old man named Rashawn Smith tried to douse a woman's house with gasoline and set it on fire in the middle of the night. The woman was 38-year-old Ashley Harden, someone he'd been in a relationship with. At that moment, Ashley and her children were asleep inside, but he never got the chance. Ashley woke up and went outside to talk to him. No one saw her alive again. Her body, showing multiple injuries, was later found behind the Ecolab plant. In this video, we're breaking down what pushed a man who was once close to this woman to douse the house where she and her children were sleeping with gasoline and then take her life. And what nightmare, in the end, this crime became for him too. To understand what led to that night, we have to go back to the lives of two people whose paths crossed once, long before their names became known across Rockford. Ashley Nicole Harden was born on April 8, 1984, in Sterling, Illinois. Her parents were David L. Harden and Kimberly A. Harden. Ashley grew up with several siblings she stayed close to for the rest of her life: Melissa, Joshua, Tiffany, Nathaniel, and Lindsay. As adults, they'd scatter across Illinois and Florida, but none of them ever drifted from Ashley. She spent her childhood and teenage years in Sterling, graduating from Sterling High School in 2002. After high school, Ashley moved to Rockford. She started her career at Ecolab, a major company that manufactures chemical products and water treatment systems. Eventually, she made the switch into healthcare. Spending the last 5 years of her life working as a front desk administrator at Mercy Health, a job that put her face to face with dozens of patients, new and returning, every single day. The people who worked with her remembered one thing consistently: her warmth. Co-workers and patients said the moment Ashley saw someone walk through the door, her whole face would light up in a wide smile, her eyes brightening like she was greeting an old friend. For a lot of the clinic's regulars, that was just part of the routine. Walking up to the front desk and being met by someone who seemed genuinely happy to see you, no matter what kind of day it was. Ashley had a gift: her voice. She sang, and she sang well. She was a member of 2 vocal groups, One Voice and Committed, and often worked as a backup singer for local performers around Rockford. Friends who'd heard her sing called it her true calling, something she could do that nobody else around her could touch. One family friend later said her voice was a gift nobody else possessed quite like she did, comparing her to a bird whose song you'd recognize instantly and never forget. But the center of Ashley Harden's life was motherhood. She had 3 children: Zion, Kaylin, and Levi Hamilton. People who watched her day to day described someone for whom her kids were the center of everything. Time spent with them, she said, was the greatest joy in her life. Friends and family would later remember her exactly that way: a devoted mother, an attentive daughter, a loyal friend. Now, the man whose path crossed with Ashley Harden's. Rashawn Smith was 8 years older than Ashley. He was also a Rockford native, but his background looked nothing like hers. According to the Rockford Register-Star, Smith was convicted of home invasion back in 1995 and served time for it. That wasn't his only run-in with the law. His history stretched back to his teenage years, which, by his own later admission, were spent in the world of street-level drug dealing. In 2019, Rashawn Smith published a book. It was called Sociopath or Wrong Path: Memoir of a Teenage Drug Dealer. A memoir about his youth, his years dealing drugs on the street, and the road that took him there. He described it as something close to a journal, written for his own sons in case something happened to him while he was locked up. In the book's introduction, he admitted he didn't see himself as a writer and wasn't claiming to be anything special. In his own words, he was just one of many young black men who'd faced the same struggles. He chose the word sociopath for the title himself, framing it as an open question aimed at himself, who he really was. Readers who picked up the book in its first years out described Smith's style as blunt and direct, and his story as a raw, sometimes disturbing account of life on Rockford streets. Some noted that he wrote without flattering himself, and that underneath the brutal episodes of his past, there was a thread running through the book about a man trying to change. That's how readers understood it at the time. A story about a hard past and a possible redemption. with no idea what was still ahead for its author. This was the man. A home invasion conviction on his record, a self-declared brush with sociopathy in his own memoir, who Ashley Hardin got involved with.
When Hardin went to check it out, Smith shot her to death. Smith and Hardin dated before the incident.
The public doesn't know exactly how they met. What's known is that at some point their paths crossed and the two became romantically involved. And almost immediately, according to people who knew the couple, cracks started forming in that relationship, cracks that today can only be pieced together from the fragmented accounts of people close to them. From the start, Smith described himself as someone with anger issues. That was his own term for it. He also told Ashley he wanted to see multiple women at the same time. Add to that his criminal record, which he apparently didn't hide either. In other words, if these accounts are accurate, Ashley was, from day one, facing a man who'd laid out every reason for concern himself, in his own words. But the way that information came across didn't read like a warning. It came across more like honesty, the kind of bluntness people are taught to value in a relationship. Someone who tells you their flaws right away often gets read not as dangerous, but as trustworthy, precisely because he isn't hiding anything. There was another side to this relationship: control. Ashley had a close friend named Kayla Trevino. Their friendship existed long before Rashawn Smith ever entered Ashley's life. But according to Kayla herself, it was Smith who worked to drive a wedge between the two women. As a result, Kayla and Ashley didn't speak for 3 years, from 2017 until January 2020, when Ashley reached back out on her own. 3 years of silence between close friends is a long stretch, and the way that silence started, through the interference of the man Ashley was involved with, raises questions about the nature of that relationship as a whole. Isolating someone from their circle is often part of a larger pattern, one where a partner slowly narrows the people around them, leaving fewer and fewer people close enough to notice what's happening and raise the alarm. It's only possible to guess what Ashley Hardin felt during those years. Her longtime friendship in ruins, with a man beside her who'd openly talked about his anger problems and his desire to be with more than one woman at once. Did she stay because she believed things could change? Was she trying to handle it herself, without realizing where it might lead? Or was there something else going on that we can only speculate about today? There are no answers to these questions, and there probably never will be. It's worth noting that this pattern, a partner who's upfront about his flaws early on, then gradually narrows the other person's world, is well known to people who study abusive relationships. Talking openly about your own honesty can work like a shield. A person who's already labeled himself dangerous seems in the partner's eyes to have already passed some kind of honesty test, and that lowers the guard. And a falling out with a close friend, even one that looks accidental on the surface, strips away exactly the kind of person who might notice the warning signs from the outside and say something before it's too late. Whether this was a deliberate strategy on Smith's part or just how things unfolded, there's no way to know for certain. Either way, the result was the same: 3 years without one of the people closest to Ashley. None of the people who knew the couple, at least none whose accounts became public afterward, ever said they saw clear warning signs before the tragedy happened. To anyone on the outside, this relationship apparently didn't stand out from countless others like it. A man and a woman who used to be a couple, still in touch even though they weren't living together anymore. Whether that's really how it looked from the outside, or whether people around them just never registered details that, in hindsight, feel like obvious red flags, that's a question this story still doesn't answer. What is known is that after the 3-year break, Ashley and Kayla did reconnect, which can be read as an attempt to bring people back into her life who could actually support her, even if it came after years of isolation. By the summer of 2022, Ashley Hardin was 38. She was still working at Mercy Health, still singing, still raising her kids. Rashawn Smith was still part of her life, an ex she remained connected to through their shared history. What exactly was happening between Ashley and Rashawn Smith in the weeks and days before July 22nd isn't fully known. Were they seeing each other regularly? Was there something specific building between them? Was tension rising gradually, or did everything look calm right up until the end? The sources available today don't answer those questions. What's known is that both of them, each in their own way, were heading toward the same night. But what happened that night would show that the warning signs Ashley's loved ones would later point to had, in fact, been visible long before things reached the point of no return. Smith's openness about his own issues, his documented pattern of control, the years Ashley spent cut off from one of her closest friends, All of it already existed in this relationship long before that night. The only question is whether it was a chain of coincidences that led to tragedy, or the predictable outcome of something baked into this relationship from the start. Before we go further, if this story's got you hooked, hit like. It tells us these are the cases worth telling. Subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation. And drop a comment. What do you think about this case? Now, let's keep going. Ashley Hardin's house sat in the 300 block of Cole Avenue in Rockford, Illinois, roughly 90 miles northwest of Chicago. This is where, in the early hours of July 23rd, 2022, the events began that would end just hours later in her death. The exact time Rashawn Smith showed up at the house that night isn't known. What is known is that he arrived with gasoline. The street was quiet at that hour. An ordinary Rockford neighborhood where, at that time of night, the houses sit dark and the residents are asleep, with no idea what's happening outside. Investigators would later find 3 empty milk jugs that had held gasoline near the house. The contents of one had been poured onto the house itself, over the walls and the front step, where Ashley and her children were sleeping at that moment. What woke Ashley up that night, a noise outside, or something else, can't be pinned down with certainty. What's known is that she and one of her sons smelled gasoline and went outside. In that moment, she made a decision that would split what happened next into 2 very different fates. She told her son to go back inside. She herself stepped outside in her robe. A car was parked outside the house at that moment. It was her last conscious act as a mother that night, sending her child to safety while she stayed outside, face to face with the man who'd shown up at her house with gasoline. She never made it back inside. At 2:56 a.m., a security camera at the Ecolab plant in Roscoe caught a Cadillac belonging to Smith pulling into the parking lot. Sources disagree on the color of the car. Some say white, others silver. The car sat there for almost 40 minutes before leaving at around 3:36 a.m. According to investigators, Smith held Ashley Hardin against her will inside that car, parked at the plant where he himself worked, for the entire time it sat there. Notably, this was the same company Ashley had worked for years earlier. No camera captured what happened inside the car during those minutes. The surveillance footage only showed the vehicle arriving and leaving, nothing of what took place inside it. 40 minutes is a long time for someone being held against their will in a confined space. What the two of them said to each other, whether Ashley tried to get away, whether she called for help, none of that is known, and it probably never will be. At around 3:45 a.m., Rockford police arrived at the Hardin house responding to a call about a missing woman. The call came from Ashley's minor son. He told police he'd seen his mother near the car shortly before, and that she hadn't come back since. The child his mother had sent inside for his own safety turned out to be the only witness whose account formed the earliest picture of what had happened. A woman had gone outside to talk to a man by a car and never came back. One child's account, woken in the middle of the night by the smell of gasoline, became the only human testimony about how this all began. Everything that came after, camera footage, police calls, evidence found at the scene, had to be pieced together without a single living witness who could say what happened in the hours between that moment and the discovery the next morning. By the time police arrived, according to the timeline investigators later established, Ashley Hardin had already been in Smith's car at the Ecolab property for nearly an hour, several miles from her own house. Neither her son nor the responding officers had any way of knowing where she was or what was happening to her. At around 7:30 to 7:35 a.m., Roscoe police got a different kind of call. Someone reported a woman's body behind a building in the 5100 block of East Rockton Road, at 5151 to be exact. That address belonged to the Ecolab plant, the same property where, hours earlier, a camera had caught Smith's car, and the same place where Smith himself worked. Roscoe is its own village, separate from where Ashley Hardin lived. From the moment Smith's car first showed up on that plant's camera to the moment her body was found behind that same building, just under 4 hours had passed. Ashley Hardin was pronounced dead at the scene. She'd been shot twice. She'd also been beaten severely. Court documents in the case describe significant injuries to her head, and investigators believe Smith had struck her there repeatedly. 2 unused rounds and several unused plastic zip ties were found near her body. A spent bullet was found underneath her. The place where her body was found looked nothing like where this had all started hours earlier. The house on Cole Avenue was a residential block, an enclosed space where the lives of sleeping children hung in the balance. The land behind the Ecolab building on East Rockton Road was open, empty at that hour, tucked next to an industrial site far from homes and any chance witnesses. What began as an attempt to burn down a house where an entire family's fate was on the line ended on a stretch of land behind a commercial building where one person's fate was decided alone. Taken together, the evidence, gunshot wounds, signs of beating, unused rounds and zip ties found near the body rather than on it, points to more than one weapon and more than one method being used. Court documents record the outcome but not the order of events, whether the gun came first and the beating came after, as an added act of violence, or whether it happened the other way around. The documents also don't explain what the unused zip ties were for, whether they were meant to restrain her at some point before things escalated further. If those answers exist, they could only come from one person, Rashawn Smith himself. The presence of unused rounds near the body, rather than spent shell casings, suggests Smith was carrying more ammunition than he needed to inflict the fatal wounds. That could point to a weapon prepared in advance with extra rounds, or it could simply mean some ammunition was dropped or lost during the incident. Court documents don't clarify which explanation is accurate. There's one more detail in this timeline worth sitting with. Smith's car left the Ecolab property at around 3:36 a.m. Ashley Hardin's body was found on that same property almost 4 hours later. Whether she was killed before the car ever left, her body left behind on the property the whole time, or killed after the car drove off and was then brought back, there's no way to know. There were no direct witnesses to what happened during those hours, and that entire stretch of time, from the car leaving to the call to police, has been reconstructed entirely from circumstantial evidence. It's worth noting that July 23, 2022, fell on a Saturday, a day off for most of the plant's workers. The land behind the building where the body was left was apparently empty during those hours. No shifts, no outside foot traffic that might have interrupted anything or sped up the discovery. That's likely why the body went unnoticed for hours, until someone happened to be near the building and found it. Even before Ashley Hardin's body was officially found by police, there was already a digital trail online connecting to whoever was responsible for her disappearance. At 4:40 a.m., a video tagged on Ashley's own Facebook page went up. It was posted by someone later identified as Rashawn Smith. In the video, he spoke to the camera calmly, with no visible distress, like a man who hadn't done anything that called for panic or fear of getting caught. He said out loud that people would probably think he was crazy and want to know why he'd done what he did. And he answered his own question with one word: lying. He said he'd given Ashley every chance to be honest with him, but that she kept lying and he'd had enough of it. He repeated the idea in different ways, that he'd given her every chance to leave if that's what she wanted, every chance to talk to him straight. There was no panic in his tone, no attempt to run from what he'd done. If anything, he came across as a man convinced he was in the right, talking to the public as someone who'd been wronged, not someone who'd caused harm. The existence of that video alone deserves attention. A man who had just been involved in a violent death didn't go quiet or disappear. He addressed a wide audience with a public statement and tagged the victim's own page on it, making sure the exact people who knew Ashley personally would see it. Whether this was calculated, a move to get ahead of the official version of events and plant his own narrative with the people who knew her first, or an impulsive act by someone not fully grasping the consequences, there's no way to know for certain. But the outcome is clear either way. What should have stood as evidence of guilt became, instead, one of the first sources of information about the crime for the people who knew Ashley Hardin. This video went up while Ashley Hardin was still officially listed as missing, before her body had even been found. For her family and friends, it became the first sign that something terrible had happened. Long before police confirmed anything, Ashley's cousin Jamie woke up that morning at home with her kids, and the first thing she saw when she opened her phone was that video. By her own account, it was the first thing she encountered the moment she opened her eyes that morning. It's likely a lot of Ashley's other relatives and friends started that July 23rd morning the same way. Not with an official call from police, but with a link someone forwarded in a family group chat or a private message. In situations like this, news tends to spread through a community fast. Social media, phone calls, quick texts. And by the time official channels make anything public, a large part of the victim's circle has often already heard from far less formal sources. That appears to be exactly what happened here. Well before Ashley Hardin's death was officially confirmed, many people close to her had already seen the video and understood that something irreversible had happened. Ashley's mother, Kimberly Hardin, later kept returning to that video in the comments under the post, asking why it still hadn't been taken down, despite repeated complaints from family to the platform. Facebook's response, each time, was that the video didn't violate its policies, and it stayed up. In the days that followed, as Ashley's family started speaking to the press, more details emerged about what led up to that night. Ashley's mother told a regional news outlet that, according to what she'd learned, Smith had planned to douse the house with gasoline and set it on fire, but Ashley caught him in the act and left with him afterward, apparently to lead him away from the house and protect the 3 children still inside.
Originally, Smith planned to pour gasoline on her house and then light it on fire, but Hardin caught him in the act and agreed to lead with him, so...
If that account is accurate, Ashley's decision to go out to Smith that night wasn't just an attempt to talk to him. It was an attempt, at the cost of her own safety, to steer danger away from her sleeping kids. That detail, which came out after the arrest, changed how people understood what happened at the door of the house on Cole Avenue. If it once looked like a woman had simply stepped outside by misunderstanding, her mother's account paints a very different picture. A conscious choice, made in a matter of seconds, to stay near a dangerous man rather than let that danger stay in the house with her children. Rockford police, after getting the missing persons call, and later the report of a body behind the Ecolab building, moved fast. Smith was named a person of interest within hours of the body being found. The investigation that followed was a joint effort between 3 agencies: the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office, Rockford Police, and Roscoe Police. Pooling resources made sense. The crime crossed 2 jurisdictions, with the victim's house in Rockford and her body found on land under Roscoe Police's jurisdiction. Exactly how this part of the investigation unfolded in detail. The specific steps investigators took in those first hours, who first connected the Ecolab cameras to Smith's car and when, can't be reconstructed from available sources. It's reasonable to assume that footage from the plant where Smith himself worked was one of the earliest leads, given how quickly he ended up in investigators' sights. Someone familiar enough with the property to choose it as a place to stop in the middle of the night narrowed the suspect pool almost immediately. Rashawn Smith was arrested that same day, a Saturday, shortly before 11 a.m. He was stopped during a vehicle check in an underground parking garage in downtown Rockford at 325 North Main Street, in the 300 block of that same street. By that point, investigators apparently already had enough to make an arrest, just hours after the body was found. The arrest happened right in the heart of downtown, Rockford's business district, far from residential neighborhoods and from the Roscoe property. That means that in the hours between leaving the Ecolab lot and getting arrested, Smith had made it back into the city and apparently carried on normally enough to end up in an underground downtown parking garage on a Saturday morning, which is where law enforcement finally caught up with him. What he did during those in-between hours, where else he went, and who, if anyone, he was in contact with, are details that fall outside what's publicly known. Inside Smith's car, the same one seen at the victim's house that night and caught on the Ecolab security camera, police found blood, a machete, plastic zip ties, Hardin's phone, and her medication. The presence of the victim's phone and medication in the suspect's car became direct, hard to dispute evidence that Ashley Hardin had, in fact, been in that vehicle during her final hours. Each item found in the car closed off a different question for investigators. The phone and medication confirmed Ashley had physically been in the car, supporting the kidnapping theory itself. The machete, a weapon that didn't directly match the injuries described on the victim, suggested Smith had come prepared for violence in some broader sense, whether or not it was actually used at the moment of the killing. And the zip ties in the car, matched to identical ones found at the crime scene, tied the suspect and the location of Ashley's death together into a chain of evidence that would be hard to explain away as coincidence. Smith was charged with 3 counts: first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated unlawful restraint. The kidnapping and unlawful restraint charges lined up directly with investigators' theory that Smith had held Ashley against her will in that car on Ecolab's property for close to 40 minutes. Bail for Smith was set at $2 million, a figure that effectively ruled out release before trial for someone in his financial position. He was booked into the Winnebago County Jail, where he'd remain until the case moved forward. The 3 charges filed in the first hours after his arrest could still be refined as investigators gathered more evidence, but even at that early stage, they captured the shape of what had happened: kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and ultimately, murder. What remained were questions that would now be answered not by police, but by the courts. After his arrest, Rashawn Smith's case moved into the Winnebago County court system. At the first hearing, Judge Tamika Walker ordered Smith to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. That kind of order, early in a murder case, is standard procedure. The court needed to determine whether the defendant was even fit to stand trial and understand the charges against him before the case could move forward. That kind of evaluation isn't an admission of guilt, and it isn't an attempt to soften the defendant's responsibility. Legally, it's a separate procedure that answers one narrow question: is this person fit to stand trial at all? That question has nothing to do with whether the defendant was of sound mind at the moment the crime was committed. Those are two entirely different legal concepts, governed by different standards. The results of that evaluation, along with its details, were never made public. What is known is that the case went on to proceed through the normal court process, meaning the evaluation apparently found no grounds to declare Smith unfit for trial. Smith spent the following months in the Winnebago County Jail, where he'd been booked the day of his arrest. He remained in custody without bail that entire time, right up through October. The $2 million bail set right after his arrest stayed out of reach for him. He spent 5 months, from arrest to sentencing, inside the same facility, waiting to see how his case would play out. On October 12, 2022, Rashawn Smith pleaded guilty. He accepted a charge of first-degree murder with the aggravating factor of using a firearm in the commission of the crime. The guilty plea came less than 3 months after his arrest, a short timeline for a murder case. The public video confession, the surveillance footage from the plant where the defendant himself worked, the testimony of the single witness to how it all began, and the physical evidence found in his own car. Together, they formed a case that would have been extremely difficult for any defense to fight in front of a jury. A judge, a jury, or anyone else involved in the case would have had access to a recording where the defendant himself, even without spelling it out directly, effectively laid out his own motive for what he did to the victim he tagged in that same post. With that much direct and circumstantial evidence stacked up, there was almost no room left for a defense built on denying involvement. The guilty plea spared Ashley Hardin's family from having to sit through a full jury trial, a process that, in murder cases, can drag on for months and involves laying out every detail of what happened in public. Instead, the case moved straight to sentencing, and the only public court proceeding the family had left to attend was the sentencing hearing. According to court records, Smith waived his right to be present at the hearing where his sentence would be decided. He chose not to show up in court on the day his fate was determined. What was behind that decision? Not wanting to face Ashley Hardin's family one last time, indifference to the outcome, or something else? The sources don't say. The choice itself is unusual. Even defendants who fully admitted guilt more often choose to hear the court's final decision in person, if only to have the chance to address the court directly before sentencing, as the law allows in most cases like this. With the defendant absent, Ashley Hardin's family members spoke at the hearing. They read victim impact statements about how this crime had changed their lives, a practice built into the law specifically so the victim's side is heard by the court before sentencing. The details of those statements weren't made public, but the fact that Ashley's family used that opportunity speaks to their determination to be heard in a process the man responsible had chosen to check out of. Victim impact statements like these are a standard part of sentencing hearings in murder cases across the American legal system. They don't change the legal classification of the crime, but they let the court see past the dry language of the charges to the real people whose lives were permanently changed. Parents who lost a daughter, children left without a mother, siblings who lost someone close to them. The judge handing down the sentence hears these words directly, right before announcing the sentence. On December 15, 2022, Judge Jennifer Clifford of the 17th Circuit Court handed down the sentence. Rashawn Smith was sentenced to 60 years in prison for first-degree murder, the maximum sentence allowed under that charge. On top of that came a life sentence, a separate penalty tied to the aggravating factor of using a firearm in the crime. Stacking two sentences, 60 years and life, might look redundant at first glance. Why hand down a fixed term to someone already sentenced to life? But that's a deliberate practice in the American court system. If one of the sentences is ever thrown out or overturned by a higher court on procedural grounds, the other one still stands on its own. That way, the sentence is protected against future legal challenges on two separate fronts. The 17th Circuit Court, which handled this case, covers Winnebago County, including Rockford, where Ashley Hardin's house was, and the area around Roscoe. The entire case fell under that court's jurisdiction from the start. From the first hearing under Judge Tamika Walker to the final sentence handed down by Judge Jennifer Clifford, a change in judges between those two stages isn't unusual. Different judges within the same court often handle early procedural matters versus the final resolution of a case. Just under 5 months passed between the arrest and the day the judge handed down the final sentence. December 15th, 2022 was the day the law decided Rashawn Smith's fate for decades to come, technically for the rest of his life. For Ashley Hardin's family, it marked the end of the legal chapter of a story that had begun almost 5 months earlier, on one night in July, but not the end of the story itself.
Shocking news tonight. The Rockford man who was convicted of murdering his ex-girlfriend after posting a video of his confession on Facebook.
On December 16th, 2022, the day after sentencing, Rashawn Smith was transferred from the Winnebago County Jail to the Stateville Northern Reception and Classification Center, an intake facility in Crest Hill where inmates are processed before being sent to their permanent placement. He never made it to a permanent facility. On December 25th, 2022, Christmas Day, at around 7:15 a.m., a corrections officer named Robin Jones found Smith's body. He'd hanged himself with a bedsheet. A note was found on the bed beside him. Rashawn Smith died by suicide less than 2 weeks after the court determined he would spend the rest of his life in prison. An investigation by Illinois State Police found that his death could have been prevented. His body was clearly visible from outside the cell, but it went undiscovered for hours after he died.
Lisette Ontiveros was supposed to check on Smith, but she didn't finish her rounds even though she falsified in a logbook that she...
A staff member named Lisette Ontiveros, who was responsible for checking on Smith overnight, never made her rounds and falsified the duty log, writing that no one could have left the unit that night. She later pointed to a leg injury as the reason she hadn't done the rounds. According to available records, she left her shift the next morning without knowing Smith was dead, and only learned what happened the following day. 4 other staff members admitted they also hadn't checked the unit where Smith was housed that night. A shift supervisor named Christopher Odette told investigators that supervising 2 units at once was, for one person, close to an impossible task. In the aftermath, Ontiveros agreed to undergo additional training. The Illinois Department of Corrections official comment was limited to saying the matter had been referred to facility administration for review and appropriate action. Smith's mother, Anita, filed a lawsuit against prison staff on August 1st. It was already the second devastating blow for her in a relatively short time. Another of her sons, 29-year-old Jazz Conley Smith, had been shot and killed at the Black Hawk Court apartment complex. A woman who, just months earlier, had been the mother of a man accused of murder, was also, at the same time, a mother who'd lost another son to violence, a detail that adds one more layer of tragedy to this story, well beyond the relationship between Ashley Hardin and Rashawn Smith. Ashley Hardin's family, for their part, looked for a way to hold onto her memory as something more than court records and crime reports. Employees at Ecolab, where Ashley had once worked, started a fundraiser for a memorial bench, later installed along the Stonebridge Trail in Roscoe. When staff raised about half the amount needed, the company stepped in and covered the rest. Local volunteers installed the bench, including members of the Roscoe Village administration, who used loading equipment to unload and secure it along a prepared spot on the trail. The bench was painted bright blue. Part of the money raised went toward Christmas and birthday gifts for Ashley's 3 children. The plaque on the bench reads, "In loving memory of a devoted mother, daughter, and friend, keep smiling, growing, loving, and showing respect." On April 8th, Ashley's birthday, family and friends gathered at the bench, where a longtime family friend named Travis Lane sang a song for her. Ecolab plant director Tom Ramsden, speaking about the company's decision to install the bench, said news of the tragedy had been a shock and a source of deep grief for everyone at the plant. Ashley's friends and family, looking back after the trial, kept circling back to the same thing. The warning signs that, in hindsight, felt obvious. Ashley's friend, Kayla Trevino, admitted she'd known about Smith's issues, but never, not in her worst nightmares, imagined he'd put himself in the position of deciding whether someone else lived or died. Ashley's cousin, Alona Perry, remembered the morning she got the call that Ashley's body had been found. The moment, she said, when it finally hit her that stories like this happen on TV, but you never think you'll live through one yourself.
She didn't get that choice and he did. Like, he chose that way out.
She's also the one who said the words people kept repeating afterward. Ashley didn't have a choice, but Smith did, and he made his.
It should be about the victim and remembering who the victim was and remembering, that they have a family.
A family with 3 young children and loved ones who miss her dearly.
Perry also said it was time to stop talking endlessly about the killer and start talking instead about who Ashley actually was and who she remains in the memory of the people who loved her. Ashley's brother, Josh, remembered his sister simply, but warmly. She was an incredible sister and friend.
The one thing we've lived through is her music. She had the most amazing voice.
A voice Perry hopes is heard for years to come.
A family friend, talking about her singing, said that gift belonged to her alone, that nobody else could sing quite the way Ashley did. This case drew wide coverage from local and regional media. WIFR, also known as 23 News, the Rockford Register Star, WREX, and Mistateline.com followed the case through every stage, from the first reports of Ashley Hardin's disappearance to the final sentencing. National outlets later picked it up too, including Yahoo, Grey News, and Oxygen, carrying the story to audiences well beyond Illinois. 23 News deserves particular mention here. The station obtained state records on Smith's death in custody through an exclusive request and ran its own investigation into the corrections staff's negligence, work that ended up forming the basis for most of what's publicly known about the circumstances of his death. Today, years after these events, the Ashley Hardin case isn't remembered for the name of the man who killed her. It's remembered for who she was, a devoted mother of 3, a daughter, a backup singer for local artists, a co-worker whose smile, according to the people who knew her, lit up whatever room she walked into. Ashley Hardin didn't deserve what was done to her. Her 3 children didn't deserve to grow up without a mother because of a decision another adult made on one specific night. Nothing that came after, not the sentence, not the negligence at the prison, not Smith's own death, undoes what was taken from that family on the night of July 23rd, 2022. Long before that night, Rashawn Smith had called himself a man with anger issues, a man with a criminal record, a man who wanted to be with more than one woman at a time. He said all of it out loud and framed it as honesty. And that leaves this story with a question for anyone who hears it. If someone tells you flat out that they're dangerous, do you believe them the first time? Or does it always take a tragedy before anyone actually does?